For that. Prayers first. Obviously, we don't skip that just because I'm late from that. So, do you guys have any particular ones? I have one that my sister wanted me to do. Dana Stanley, the adult daughter of a friend of my sister Eileen, whose mother is Carol Stanley, fell and broke her hip and femur recently. She's in the hospital and has had to have blood transfusions twice as a result. And so she's still in the hospital. She's a member at Piedmont Road, which is where they both are, but Carol wanted it to be shared to get more prayer. She's quite concerned about her daughter. So mention that one. Other things that we should have in mind. Yes, sir.
Thankful for.
Good.
Kind of amazing right after your sermon and the emotion you shared that Tammy just got out of the hospital today. They thought she had a TIA, but she's okay.
Good.
The MRI and CT scans are okay. They did echo, and they're looking at a little thing with her heart, but thankfully everything else is all right. They didn't find any clots.
That's great.
But she went through some stuff before that was pretty scary, so we appreciate all the prayers, and things are okay so far.
Good. Having been there before, although mine was actually turned out to be a minor stroke, as opposed to Carrie's from that, I know kind of what you go through, and that's a very frightening experience. Mine only lasted about 45 minutes or an hour. I don't know, it stopped when I was in the MRI machine, but up to that, I lost feeling, I lost ability to speak well, all those kinds of fun things. So glad that's turned out so well for her, and prayers certainly do pay off. So we're glad to hear that things have gone well with Tammy. Yes, ma'am.
There's a lady that I work with that was admitted to the ICU today. She was in DKA. Her blood sugar was really high.
Right.
So her name's Tricia.
Okay. Tricia and high blood. Anything else? I know there's quite a group of people on our list that we get on a daily basis. So let's keep all those in our prayers as well. If you bow with me then. Dear Heavenly Father, we're so thankful to have an opportunity to express our needs to you, to ask for prayers for the various people we've talked about here, as well as those on our prayer lists and those that are on our hearts, and including those that we're not even personally aware of, but that need you in some way to comfort, to strengthen, and most importantly, to bring healing to. And we're thankful for a positive response for Tammy. We're so grateful for that, and we praise you for that. We ask you to also be with your church here and around the world through missionaries and through the work that's going on, that your kingdom will grow and continue to thrive. We ask that you be with governments that you set in place to not prohibit that. We ask that you guide us in what we do here today, that we'll find lessons in all that we hear about and learn and become more like what you would have us to be and more like you. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Dreams and visions. Last week we talked about Pharaoh's dream. His first dream involved 7 fat cows and then 7 ugly, gaunt cows that came up out of the river, out of what would be the Nile. And in that one, the 7 fat cows went ahead and ate the gaunt cows ate the 7 fat cows, and yet didn't look the better for it. Then he followed that up with a second dream. Went back to sleep, had a second dream, had a shaft of wheat, had 7 heads on it. Those 7 heads were fat, really nice looking grain. And then grew up again, and then there was one with 7 thin heads on there that looked really bad. And again, the 7 thin heads ended up swallowing up the 7 fat heads from that, and that was Pharaoh's dream. He can't get an answer to that. He wants an answer to what these dreams are about from all of his, wise men and people magicians and all those kind of people to get an answer as to what it meant. But finally, the butler, who we may recall had a dream, along with the baker, that Joseph was able to interpret, remembers Joseph. Joseph had asked him to remember him when he got back into his job. He forgot and didn't mention him until now when Pharaoh needs somebody to interpret the dream. And he says, I know somebody that interpreted my dream and the baker's dream, a good one and a bad one, but he's been able to do that. And so he sends off for David. He gets all cleaned up because he's been down there in the dungeons, presented before Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells him what his dreams are, and he says the interpretation of those are about 7 good years and 7 bad years. It's 2 dreams, but it's one message that God wants you to know. To really understand this is going to happen. There's no question about what's going to happen. So you're going to have 7 good years of crops, and you're going to have 7 years that's just famine, and you've got to prepare for that. And so Joseph goes further. At least we don't know that God gave him the advice, the direction, or whatever to say what he said after that, but he recommends that there be put in place a discerning, a wise leader to guide them through this period of time, both the good years and the ability to get to the bad years. And he suggests they take 1/5 of the crops in the good years, set it aside so that they've got crops for the bad years from that. And so that's his recommendation to Pharaoh as he's gone ahead and given the interpretation. I'll tell you how to do something about it. Pharaoh then says, well, who's smarter, wiser, more discerning than you? Why don't you go in there and be in that position? So he puts Joseph into that position. We talk about the fact that this is all part of God's plan, because ultimately Joseph's going to be there when it comes time to save God's people and to ultimately be the guide to where God's people end up in Egypt, to in a few more years after that, when the Pharaohs forget about Joseph and what he did, to be put under slavery. As God had said, you'll be under it for about 400 years before I'm going to let you have the promised land. So all a part of God's plan. We also got to talk a little bit about the Midianites' dream. We said Israel's, as this comes up in Judges, Israel's again gone after other gods, maybe supplementing on Jehovah, but they've added it, if not replaced him from that. And they now have realized that they're being put under the dominion of the Midianites, and they cry out to God, and God once again feels sorry for them. They are his people, and he chooses to give them somebody to save them. So he picks the very lowly Gideon. He comes from the lowest of tribes, lowest of the families in there, the lowest within his own family, but he's the one who wants to do it. He is, funnily enough, called a mighty warrior, even though he's not a warrior at that point. So he gets a lot of credit before he deserves any. But he is one who really doesn't feel comfortable that this is what he wants to do or that he's the one to do it. So he requires signs from God. He wants to have the fleece there lying down. Everything gets wet except the fleece. Okay, that's not enough. Let me put it down again. The only thing that gets wet now is the fleece and nothing around it. And so God does those things. God declares to him that the Midianites are already given to Gideon. But Gideon is still not really comfortable, and God senses that. God knows that without Gideon telling him that. He knows that fears, and so he says, if you want to get over that, what I want you to do is to take your servant if you need to, but I want you to go, if you're not ready, go and eavesdrop. Listen in to the camp of the Midianites. Sneak up to it and listen to what you hear. When you hear things there, you'll be more courageous about it. You'll be more confident that I'm going to give you the victory I promise from that. So he goes down with his servant, and he hears a Midianite telling about a dream. That's where we get the dream. The Midianite has a dream where a loaf of barley comes rolling into the camp, and it completely knocks down the tent. And the interpretation that's made by the fellow Midianite is, it's the army of Gideon, and they're come to wipe us all out. So like we said, that's a lot like what the people of the Promised Land thought before the Israelites came there. Their hearts melted. They already were in fear of them, and that's the way the Midianites were. Mighty, far outnumbering Gideon and his little group of people, but their confidence is not there. God's put it into them that they're going to be defeated from that. And so what happens? Gideon becomes confident. He goes back. He stirs up the army and says, we've got this victory. Let's go into it. And of course, ultimately they won that victory. Gideon's not a great leader like most of the judges from that. He's not horrible, but he does fall back into idolatry when he goes back. But he also is a person who says, don't make me king. Not my son either, but he has an illegitimate son that is trying to get in that position at one point. But that's enough about him. Let's look at that. We didn't get a chance to ask the questions to ourselves about that dream last week. So who had the dream in this case? Well, it was a Midianite. It was a non-believer. We've said dreams tended to have happened more often with non-believers than believers, whereas visions are pretty much the sole domain of those that believe from that. The situation was the Midianites had been putting Israel under their control and making life miserable for them, and Israelites had cried out for God to provide them a Savior, and Gideon was chosen to do that, but Gideon was very uncomfortable about whether or not God was going to be with him. Even though God had shown him through very miraculous signs, he still didn't necessarily know if he believed that they were going to be successful. So the content of his dream isn't his dream, it's the dream of the Midianite that was this loaf of barley knocking down a tent. More important than that wasn't that Gideon interpreted it. That's another unusual thing about this particular dream. It's not the believer that then interprets it in any useful way, but again, another non-believer, another Midianite says, well, this is what it means. And Gideon takes that as God has interpreted it to him, and this is a message to me. Because God sent me down here to eavesdrop, this is what I hear, This is the reality of what's going to go on there. And so what was the purpose of that dream and vision? It was to give Gideon the courage to be able to go and carry out God's plan to go down there and fight and turn back the Midianites from that. That was the purpose of it. How did it figure into God's general plan? I think it's harder to say, like we've done with most of the others. There's more of a direct line as to how it plays into it. Certainly it gives us yet another example of God delivering his people, and that God did it and not Gideon, that God can do whatever he wants to do from that. But there's less of a, I think, of a direct line into the bigger plan that we see through the Israelites, when Joseph's getting his dreams or interpreting Pharaoh's, like we just talked about a minute ago. Well, that obviously plays into, as we said, the Israelites getting there, fulfilling the dreams that he'd had already, but the Israelites going there so before long they can get those 400 years of being under the thumb of the Egyptians before they're ready to go into the promised land. Any other comments about what we talked about last week? All right, we will make some progress this week. We'll talk about Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 3. Solomon, obviously, the heir as far as things were concerned for David. And so he's been put into the position. David's died at the end of 2 Samuel, basically, and he's got that position from that is kind of where we're going to pick up from that. So in 1 Kings chapter 3, the first 4 verses. Now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. Not an unusual thing. You see that in all your nice princess movies, right? Where the princess has to marry the prince of another country and we have a bond from that. It happened, for real, and that's what the situation is here. To make the treaty work, kind of place to close it out, I'll marry your daughter, all right? So I wouldn't want to kill off the people that are my in-laws. I guess that's my theory about that. Then he brought her to the city of David until he'd finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall all around Jerusalem. Now remember, before David, Jerusalem was not the Israelites. It was owned by the Jebusites. They kept it even after the taking over, the conquering of Canaan. That was not one of the areas that they took over. So David was really the one that done it. That's why it's always called the city of David, because he's the one that conquered it for them from that. So they had to build everything up that we think of as being a part of Jerusalem. It wasn't there at that point. Meanwhile, the people sacrificed at the high places because there was no house built for the name of the Lord until those days. Now, the high places means the high elevated places. That was just a tendency of human nature to think if we're going to worship, we want to get closer to God, we're going to get up to the highest places. And the high places in the Bible, in the Old Testament, are almost always associated with that being where the idolatry happened. That's where you worshipped any of these other gods that they made, carvings out of, whether it was the actual ones in the sky, the stars, the sun, the moon, and any of those kind of, heavenly type of beings, or whether it was animals or anything else that they were worshiping from that, the worship tended to happen at high places. That's where they built their temples or where they worshiped from that. There is no house for them to do. Now, did that mean that the Israelites didn't have a place they should go? Well, what still existed at this particular point? Well, the tabernacle still existed, right? It was there. It was something that they could go to, but it was their opinion that there wasn't a big place like these other people had temples and all that, so they started, going to other places from that and used the excuse probably to some extent, well, there's no temple to God, so I'm going to go do this as this is good enough. And so they went to the high places. And Solomon loved the Lord. Well, that's good. Walking in the statue of his father David, a man by, that God had a particular association and connection with, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places. So he's already got a problem. This is before he really gets led astray by all the wives that he takes on later on in his life, who lead him down all the different gods that they're apart. He's already getting off from things and sacrificing and providing incense up there. Yeah?
I mean, this is dumb. When he married Pharaoh's daughter, did he have other wives already at this point, or was this like, his big time wife? You know what I'm trying to say? Was it a true commitment, or was it a symbolic thing?
It was a major one for him because, he built her a house.
That's right.
As opposed to any of the other wives that he has. I don't remember if she was necessarily the first one, but it was a huge deal because this is Pharaoh, still one of the major kingdoms out there. That was that treaty, and he had to show her at least, and Pharaoh, that he put her in high esteem from that. So he built her a house from that. So she's treated differently than any other wife that we see, of course, throughout that. We don't really hear a whole lot about others of names, but she's up there, and whether it's because he cared more about her, or whether it's solely because it was a political thing to do, the Bible doesn't really tell us from that. Now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place, because that's where stuff was. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. That would take a while to do. Even though offerings were not burning the whole animal usually, that's pieces of it were burned from that. So it's not that you had to wait for the whole bowl to be burned and wait and put on the next one from that. That'd take a while, but pieces of it necessarily from that. But he offered 1,000 from there. Picking up then in verse 5 and 6. At Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. So now we have a dream of a believer, although he is straying from being a full believer to God. But he is still very strongly in God's camp from that, and God sees it that way. So as a dream, we know it's a dream because it happens at night. We said that's the difference between dreams and visions as well. And God said, ask, what shall I give you? Can you imagine? God appears to you and says, what can I give you? What would race through your mind? It's kind of one of those things. If you had $1 million, what would you do with it, right? What would your answer be if God said, ask, what shall I give to you? You know, well, you think all sorts of different things of it. And Solomon said, though, you have shown great mercy to your servant David, my father. You've really cared about my father. He's done some things wrong, Bathsheba, amongst other things along the way. Because he walked before you in truth, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with you. He said he didn't try to rebel necessarily from you. I mean, when he did Bathsheba, he let his fleshly side take control of him, but he wasn't trying to rebel against God per se. He didn't sit there and say, I'm going to do this just to show God I can. He did this because his fleshly side, he wanted to do that. But he was one who, tried to act and live. That's why his special relationship, as far as God always refers to it with him. He said, you have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. And remember, God identified that it was to be Solomon that was going to follow after David. So that was kind of dedicated to go that route from that. And he told him that as long as people were faithful, that an ancestor of David's would sit on the throne. And he even let that go even when they began to be unfaithful, that there was still a remnant where his line was kings of part of the kingdom for a good long period of time, even when there was bad, evil kings in that place. It still happened from them. He continues then in verse 7. He says, now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David. He's recognizing that, and he recognizes that God is really the one behind kings. But I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or to come in. Now, we don't know how young he was at this point. There's a whole lot of discussion. Various commentaries try to come up with different ages from him. Josephus claims that he died at the age of 96. That seems pretty far-fetched to me based on the data that's out there, that he reigned for 40 years. That meant he didn't start reigning until he was 90 or 56, so I don't think that's how old he was, because he's already king and he's talking about how young he is. So we don't know. He might have been more in his 20s probably from that. But anyway, he's not necessarily a young child, but he's admitting what? I really don't know what I'm doing here. I'm very new to this. I'm naive. I'm not practiced. I'm not really skilled at this. I don't really know how to conduct myself on a day-to-day basis from that. And he says, and your servant is in the midst of your people. These are your people. I feel that onus. I'm not just in charge of a kingdom. I'm in charge of God's chosen people. How much more is that load on me than just being in charge of another group of people that are out there? Whom you have chosen, a great people, not again so much of number, but they're great because of that relationship to God. He says, too numerous to be numbered or counted. There were kingdoms bigger than theirs, but certainly they were, significant ones to some extent. Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people. So out of all the things that he could choose, he says, I want to have an understanding heart. He didn't say exactly, I want wisdom, but it's different words for wanting wisdom, right? If I understand things, then I know how to do things. I can judge people that way. How do I do that? Well, it's wisdom that tells me, I can look at things and come out with the right decisions out of that, the right things to pronounce out of that. that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? He's basically admitted, I feel overwhelmed. You know, it was great for my father. He was great at this job. Now I've got the job. You picked me for it, but I feel inadequate for this job. So if you ask me what I want the ability to be adequate at doing this job. I want to feel comfortable that I'm doing the best for this people of yours and doing the best for you I possibly can. And I don't feel like I can do that with where I am and the skill set I have right now. So if you want to ask me for something that I want to have, that's what I want. I want an understanding heart to judge my people. Or, in other words, I want wisdom in one word. Now, God says what? The speech pleased the Lord. God's happy with that response from him. That Solomon had asked this thing. And then God said to him, because you have asked this thing, and have not asked for a long life for yourself, nor asked for riches for yourself, nor have asked for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding, discern, justice. He's saying all these other things normal people would have asked for, right? The average human being out there, when they're asked, what would you want? If you got one wish from a genie, what would it be? Well, I'd like to have, a whole bunch of money. I'd like to have a whole bunch of power. I'd like to have a bunch of fame. I would like to live forever. All those kind of things would be the normal human nature of being able to answer a request, an open-ended check like that from the all-powerful being, that being God. And yet, that's not what he asked for. That really touched the heart of God, that he asked for something that didn't directly benefit him all that much. In fact, it just made some things easier in making decisions, but everybody was coming to look for those. That's what we'll see in the life of Solomon, right? Everybody wanted to come and get some of that wisdom, whether they were in the kingdom or not. So a lot of pressure on it from that. But he says, because he asked for this, behold, I have done according to your words. He's already done it for you. Although I'd argue that some of that wisdom he does, ascertain himself over time. Thus, what we read in Ecclesiastes, his pursuit of everything out there to see what's meaningful. I think that's part of when he learned some of his wisdom from that, is that he learned how everything else was folly from that. But anyway, he said, I've done according to your words. See, I've given you a wise and understanding heart. So there has never been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. So, anybody asks you the world's wisest man, there's no question in God. It still is Solomon. He was the most wise and understanding person because he was given that level of gift from God at his own request from that. So neither before you or after that. He said, you want that, and it's such a good thing to have. I'm not going to give you just a little bit of it. I'm not going to give you just enough to make it by. I'm going to make you the most wise and understanding person that was ever and ever will be from that. Verse 13. And have also given you what you have not asked. So you didn't ask for these other things, but I'm going to give them to you. Both riches and honor. So there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. Now, that's a curious thing that he chose to do that. It's nice in a way, I suppose. I'm sure Solomon's liking it, but it is the things that are challenging, right? It's hard to be humble if you have all the money you could want, right? It's hard to be humble if everybody's telling you how great you are. So he blessed him that way, but I think maybe, again, and we read again in what goes on in Ecclesiastes, that's part of Solomon gaining some of his wisdom. To see that the value was not in those other things that he could have asked for, yet he got. But it was in what he really said he wanted, which was the wisdom from that. But he got to experience somewhat why those other things weren't all that they're cracked up to be. I don't know, but at least that's what he gave them. So again, like he does with David and Boaz, he said, so if you walk in my ways, okay, this is not an open-ended thing. I'm not just giving you something without expectations on my side. This is kind of like a contract from them. You got to walk in my ways, to keep my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, realizing you're going to err sometimes here or there, but your heart's in the right direction. That's where heart of David really comes into play. Then I will lengthen your days also. Now again, we could argue whether he had them lengthened or not. I think that's why Josephus, who we see, as a historian out there, says he lived those 91, 96 years or whatever, to kind of make more fulfillment of that. Like I said, I don't think the data shows that he lived that long, but in any case, he was going to get longer days if, in fact, he kept the commandments in addition to the other things. Then Solomon awoke, and indeed it had been a dream. So, started out saying it's a dream, and at the end we say it's a dream. And he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord and offered up burnt offerings, offered peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants from that. So he's thankful to God. He was humble when he asked God for things, and because of that humility and for his pureness of heart in asking for a useful thing versus a very personal thing, a thing that would benefit him directly, God blessed him with that and much, much more, making him, unique in so many different ways to those that preceded him, and for the most part, those who succeeded him from that. Any other comments about it before we go through our questions? All right. Who had the dream? In this case, Solomon, shortly after he'd taken over from his father David. The situation when it occurred was he was just starting to start that life as king. He'd already made a treaty with Egypt, one of the most important places to kind of set a treaty not to have problems, have peace, married Pharaoh's daughter, but he's already starting to feel the weight of the responsibility that he's taking on. The content of that dream is basically just God asking him a question and him responding back to it. We've seen that. Some of the dreams were very vivid with all sorts of imagery. We saw that with Pharaoh. We saw that with the butler and the baker. We've seen an earlier one which was much the same way, where words came out. Remember when Laban was spoken to by God? He just was told not to say good or bad or deal good or bad with Jacob, right? There wasn't a bunch of pictures taken. There wasn't any imagery to go with it and says, here's a bad guy, knocks him down, and a good guy over here knocks him. No, it was words as far as we know. Same thing we see here. But there's an exchange, right? We've seen that before too. An exchange with God of talking about it. Remember when we were back and Abraham and Sarah had lied about their relationship, and the king got a dream, and he had an exchange with God. And again, it wasn't a bunch of pictures of that. And he exchanged about God judging him when he had not really taken advantage of Sarah at all. So it's not the first dream we've seen about that, but it is a different one than we've seen a lot of them, or we think of dreams for the most part, because it isn't about pictures and stuff in it. The purpose of this dream here was to, bless Solomon. Very much, I think, for the benefit of his father more than Solomon. He hadn't really had a chance to do anything at that point. Maybe because of his attitude that God saw from that, we don't know. But I would guess that as much as anything, it was about his father and how he had been faithful to God and his special relationship with him. But God gives him an opportunity to pick something that he would ask for from him, from that. And as we know, he definitely took advantage of it in the right way. He asked for the right type of thing and got blessed with a bunch of things from that. How did it figure into God's plan? Well, I'm sure you may have some of your own opinions from that. I mean, again, it doesn't have a direct tie into how we get to the Messiah necessarily, but I think it definitely shows God's appreciation when we make good choices about what we want to pursue. We have an open avenue to talk to God through prayer, and we can choose to use that in a lot of different ways. We can, thank Him for things. We can glorify Him for things. We can do all sorts of things, but one of the big things we do is we ask for things. God doesn't usually say, what do you want? But we can ask for things from that. And we see here, you ask God for the right things. If we put our minds on the right things that God's going to be in favor of, that help us to do a better job in His kingdom, God's going to not only give us those things, but He's going to bless us in other ways. It may not always be material from that. It may just be in the tighter relationships that we have, the positive honor that we're shown by other people for living a life that's closer to what God wants us to do. But there is a return that God gives us, and we know there's an ultimate return that God's going to give us for the pursuit of the right things from that. So if nothing else, it's certainly a great example of what happens when you pray for the right things for the right reasons. He didn't pray for that so that he'd be well-renowned or that he would get the riches or he'd live longer from that. He prayed for that because he wanted to do a good job for his nation, for his people, and to live up to the role that he'd been given, and to live up to the kind of the legacy of his father from that. And so we've got to keep that in mind as well. Yeah?
Do we know how
We don't know. Some think that, a lot of people think he was somewhere between 21 and 24. Like I say, Josephus would have to argue that he was much older. He was in his 50s. Doesn't make much sense with a lot of other things that are in the Bible. But we don't know when he died, at what age he died. So it's hard to roll back. We don't, we have it here where he says he's a young man or something, but we don't really have any way to judge what age he's at that point. So again, it depends on what kind of things you use as a basis to come up with an age. I'd say try to make him more in the 20s than later. Wise for his age. That's what a lot of them point to when you say that kind of stuff. Wise for his age and beyond. Other comments about Solomon and his dream? All right. Let's move on to somebody we know who's involved with dreams. Let's talk about Daniel. Daniel himself doesn't really have dreams. He more often, as we said with believers, has visions. So we'll see his visions when we start looking at visions, or we might, depending on how the quarter goes. But we'll handle dreams first. So he, as you know, or may recall or not recall, he's an Israelite. When they were taken captive, they took a lot of the young men that were in the royal bloodhood and that bloodline and those kind of things, and they took them off and took them into captivity, but they took them off with an expectation that they could be of value in helping to rule, that they had the right background and the right experiences and the right exposure to doing those things. And so Daniel was one of those that was taken into that, along with 3 people that we tend to know more by. Daniel's interesting. That's his Hebrew name. We know the other 3 mostly by their Babylonian names, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or however you want to pronounce those. I hear them differently now. I grew up with it always being that way, so I go with that. But he's almost always called Daniel. Sometimes leaders will call him by his other name, Belshazzar or whatever. But normally he's that way. And so if you remember, they get taken. They want to treat him well, so they want to give him the food that the king eats, which is very rich and whatever. And David knows that's not what God wants him to do. And so he asks if they can, the 4 of them can have, fruits and vegetables and those kind of things. And has to kind of negotiate that. Let us try this out for a little bit, and if we look worse, then we'll eat the other stuff. But they don't. They look much better than the rest of them, and so that goes well from that. And so ultimately they're put into positions of power, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on in the story, so I won't go there far. So in this one, Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon. This is about his 2nd year of his rule, and as it says here, and he has dreams. So big surprise, we're talking about him. So let's start out in verse 1 of Daniel chapter 2. Now in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. It's a nightmare for him. It's bothering him. He can't get it out of his mind, so he can't sleep anymore. So he calls the people that he expects to be able to interpret that, or he calls for them to be there. Did they all show up? I don't think so, and we'll understand why in a little bit, that I don't think they were all there, but he calls for them. And they came and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. If you thought you had a dream that had a meaning, that would make you pretty anxious, particularly if it's one that doesn't make you very comfortable, because you don't really understand. It's a very weird dream as far as you're concerned. And if it has a meaning, you want to understand what that is. It seems like a message. And I think he probably kind of relates things together to kind of understand this that way. So he really wants to know what the meaning of it is. But he's a pretty wise king in this case, as we'll find out. So the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, and they said, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. That's the normal way we expect it to do. Tell us what you dreamed. We will come up with something. We'll come up with a story that fits it really well, that will make you happy, by the way, king. We'll make sure it does that, because if you're unhappy with it, you might kill us. But I'm not going to go that route either, but we want to try to make you happy. So tell us what the dream is. We'll give you the interpretation. Well, the king's not going to fall for that. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. I'm not going to change this. If you do not make known the dream to me, if you don't tell me what I dreamed first, and then its interpretation, what does it mean, You shall be cut into pieces. Your house shall be an ash heap. He's not going to use the carrot with this, and he's got the stick, doesn't he? He says, there's the only bad thing's going to happen if you don't deliver on what I want. You've got to tell me what I dreamed, and then what does it mean? Because otherwise, I know you're going to tell me what it means. And it probably isn't going to mean that. If all I do is tell you what the dream is, you'll come up with an interpretation. But it probably won't be accurate, but it'll try to sound good to me. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you'll receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. Not any big task, right? I mean, after all, they were the Chaldeans and the magicians, sorcerers, and all that business, and they should be able to come up with it. And they're not dummies either. They answered again and said, let the king tell his servants a dream, and we'll give its interpretation. He just told them, my decision's firm. I'm not going to bend on this. They also know it may be firm, but we have no chance on this one at all. So we're going to have to try to appeal that you will change your mind and give us what the dream is, and then we'll tell you about it. And the king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time. I know you're just going to use that as a means to come up with something for me. If I tell you what the dream is, you'll spend your time then making up something in your mind that explains it. If I don't tell you what the dream is, you don't have that opportunity to come up with some story. You're going to have the answer along with the dream itself. So I'm not going to do that with you. You see, because you see that my decision is firm. I've told you that already. I'm not going to bow down to this. I'm not telling you the dream because I know how that goes. I've been here before. I'm no dummy. Maybe only my second year, but I've seen it before. If you do not make the dream known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. He says, you're just going to keep saying stuff to me, trying to draw out time to avoid the fact you don't know what the dream is and you don't know its interpretation. I know that's what you're going to do. Been here before. I know how you guys are. You're not going to pull this one on me. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. If you can tell me the dream, which I know what the dream is, I had it. The interpretation, I don't know. If I knew the interpretation, I wouldn't need you guys. But if you can tell me the dream that I do know, then I can trust the interpretation that I don't know. But you can easily make up something that's not true if you know what the dream is. And so I'm going to make it tougher on you. One time we see that kind of things happen. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Nobody on earth is able to do this, king. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things. You are the first one. Nobody would ask for this. Nobody would ask for us to come up with the dream, king. It's totally ridiculous to do that. Of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean, it is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods. The gods are the only ones that know what it is. Of course, they believed in multiple gods, so that's why they didn't say God in that respect. And whose dwelling is not with flesh. They're not down here, so they're not going to give you that definition either. No man can do it. Gods are not down here with us, so if they're not going to do it, impossible request that you're making from that. King didn't take it well. For this reason, the king was angry and very furious and gave a command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. All of them. Wipe them all out. They're all fakes anyway, so go ahead and wipe them out. They're charlatans. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Why are they going and seeking out Daniel? First of all, it's fairly clear Daniel wasn't there when this happened. So not all of them were called in to see Nebuchadnezzar. But the fact of the ones that were the chief ones or whatever couldn't come up with an answer and just seemed to be delaying on him, he went ahead and didn't say, well, bring in the next group. We'll just wipe this group out and keep going until we get somebody that can do it. He just was going to wipe them all out. So they sought out Daniel's companions. Why Daniel and his companions? Well, go back to the first chapter, verses 17 through 20, of the things that we talked about. The fact that they had the food that God wanted them to take and those kind of things. As a part of that, starting in verse 17, as for these four young men, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I don't know the names backwards, so can't go with that. God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So when you're going to call in all the wise men, clearly those four were part of the group. Thus they were looking for him. And Daniel specific already has called out that he had understanding of visions and dreams. We don't know what he did to verify that, or whether that's just what was written down by Daniel, that he already had that ability based on him writing these words after the situations that he went through. We don't know when he wrote the book. He didn't necessarily write it like a diary day by day. Whether he went back and wrote that afterwards and said, God gave me that understanding and that's what I had from that, we don't know. But it says he had all understanding, all visions and dreams. So definitely this would be somebody you would have called in. Now at the end of the days when the king had said they should be brought in, the king of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the king interviewed them. That is all the men, all the young men that they had brought in and put into that intern program, royalty interns, and brought them in before them. He interviewed them, and among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in their Babylonian names. And therefore they served before the king. They were put right in there with him, not just off somewhere in some minor positions from that. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. Again, why were they not called in if that was the case? If he had found them to be that way, why didn't he call them in the time when he wanted that interpretation? And why did he go ahead and determine that everybody should be killed without doing it? We don't know. God works in weird ways. Kings work in weird ways. But there's no question why they were going to seek him out to kill them. They were already in that class of wise men and of dream interpreters. So that's why they were seeking out Daniel and his 3 friends from them. But they don't seem to know exactly what's going on completely, because we pick back up in chapter 2 that we're looking at in Daniel in verse 14. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. So there must be right on the door of being killed, because Arioch's there to him to talk to, and he's in charge of killing everybody. And he answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? Why is he so quick to just wipe everybody out? What's made such a big deal to the king? Why is he in this, rash mood that he's in from that? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So clearly Daniel did not know that the king had had a dream and was asking for the dream and the interpretation from the wise men, even though he'd been credited with being able to interpret dreams 10 times wiser than all these other people. Weird how that happens sometimes. And in such a short time. It's only his 2nd year in charge, but that's the situation from that. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time. That's a pretty brave thing to do. He's mad at all the wise men. You go, hey, king, I know you're upset. I know you want to answer right now. Give me a little time. I'll give you an answer. Just kind of calm down. Give me a few moments here. That's pretty brave. Almost up to the level of Esther going in to ask favors of her husband from that. You just didn't do those kind of things. Kings didn't necessarily grant them from that. But the king desperately wants to know the answer to it. Remember, he's not just mad. He has a reason for being mad. He really is troubled by the dream, and he wants an answer from that. So that makes him, I think, more open to Daniel suggesting, I can get it for you, I just can't get it to you right this second. You got to give me a little time here from that. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He tells his 3 friends, here's what's going on. You want to know why they're trying to kill us? Let me explain that to you. There's this vision, this dream that the king's had, and he doesn't know what it is, and what he wants to know both the dream and the interpretation, and even the charlatans can't make up a dream and an interpretation, because he knows what the dream is he had, so it's got to be real. Nobody fakes this wake. And why does he make it known to his companions? That they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning the secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. That's one of those personal ones that we can call to God and say, God, save my life, help me through this, get me through this disease, this illness, whatever. That's the same kind of thing Daniel's doing here, something we don't have to face like Daniel is, but the same kind of concept that may be happening around us, but save us from that. Save us for being faithful to you. So they sought, all of them, the first thing they do is they pray to God about it. Right? And they pray to him to give him mercy and to give them the secret. Give us that insight into what the dream was and what its interpretation is from that. That's what they asked for. So the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Notice it doesn't say a dream here. It's a night vision. We probably won't come back to it when we look at visions, but that's what goes on because there's nothing really there other than saying it was revealed. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. He thanks him. He says, so Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's demand. Again, he's quick to credit God. That's why Daniel is seen as such a faithful character in the Bible. One of the key ones when other times we talk about, if these people were here, I still wouldn't save anybody but them. Daniel is one of those people that's called out because of that faithfulness to God. And he turns to God, and God rewards them, saves their life by revealing it from him, but he doesn't immediately go and try to take credit for it. He stops and thanks God for giving that to him, giving him the insight, and therefore saving the lives of him and his three friends. Therefore Daniel went to Arok, remember he's the captain of the guard, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. He didn't say, do not destroy me and my three friends. It's fine to go on with the rest of them. I didn't like them anyway. They don't know what they're doing. Just go ahead. But just me and my three friends, save us. He said, don't do it anymore. You don't want anybody killed from that. I will take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Then Arok quickly brought Daniel before the king. I think Arok wasn't enjoying killing people necessarily in that deal. It's kind of looks like did they really deserve it? Did you really believe those people were going to do it when they've been fooling you all this time and suddenly you want to kill them? I don't know if it's that's kind of hitman I want to be. So he's probably pretty happy not to do that. So he brings him very quickly to the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. Notice he takes credit. Daniel came in there earlier and met with the king, so it's not like the king didn't know who was going off and thinking about it, but Arok says, hey, I found a guy. Thank you, you're welcome. You've been wanting to know this. I took care of that for you, king. I want some credit out of this one. And the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, that's his Babylonian name, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? My request isn't changing. So if you're just in here, like some of the other ones probably came back and tried to get me to tell you the dream, it's not going to work. I want to know the dream and its interpretation. Are you ready for that? Are you going to give it? Are you able to do that? And Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. Now, the king knew that, but David's just making the point. All these charlatans, they cannot tell you that. They haven't got that ability. It's not going to happen from them, and you've kind of experienced that already. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. Daniel, very much like others, immediately gives the credit to God. I'm going to tell you that, but don't mistake it. I'm not the one doing it. God's the only one that interpreted. He shared it with me from that. And he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. This dream you've had, Nebuchadnezzar, is about the future. You don't usually have dreams about the past, not that God's going to give you. So it's almost always about the future, immediate or longer term than that. In this case, it's longer term than immediate. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. I'm going to continue to emphasize this. This is the future, king. This is what's going to happen, and God's the one giving it to you. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living. I didn't get this because I'm such a great guy. It's not because of me at all. But for our sakes, who made known the interpretation of the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. There's two reasons that God has given me this interpretation and told me about the dream. One is to save the lives of me and my three friends. God loves us and God's taking care of us because we asked him to. But the second thing is that you can get satisfaction for what you want, king. You want to know the thoughts of your heart? Well, God's also making it happen because of that. He's saving us and he's giving you insight from that. He's obviously going to go on and give the dream and the interpretation of it, but it's a better point to stop at this point now. Any other comments at this point? It'll be 2 weeks. Next week is the lads to leader sessions. The men will be up here next Wednesday. The women will be down in the fellowship hall. I will not be here, so it worked out well for me. I'm going to be off at a wedding and also to celebrate my youngest brother's 60th birthday. So we'll be doing both those things in Montana over that weekend. So we will be headed out that Wednesday. So that timed out. They didn't plan it for me like that, but it works out really well for me because the one time I was going to miss, I'm not going to have to miss. You guys won't be doing it anyway. But you will have to wait 2 weeks to find out about the dream. All right. You got the book, yeah. You got the cheat sheet. I don't know why you bother showing up. You all know what it's already about. I don't know why you listen to me. All right, well, great. Hope you got something out of it, and look forward to seeing you guys in class again in 2 weeks.